Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of the EF's horizon and watched the quiet stars. The glass around the command deck was clear, with a faint shimmer from the shield. Crew members spoke in low voices. The ship moved with a steady hum like a calm breath before a storm. She placed her hand on the rail and felt the pulse of the engines. She had flown patrols, raids, and escorts. She had lived through losses that still woke her at night. But this felt different. It felt like the moment before a door opened and no one knew what was on the other side. Across the galaxy, the Alien Council held a meeting in a bright chamber. The floor was white stone. The ceiling looked like a sky. Delegates of many species sat in curved rows. Their voices mixed into a soft roar. The chair of the council, a tall figure with glassy skin, read a report. Their analysts had made a projection. They said human forces would be defeated in a few hours. They had charts that showed bright lines and falling numbers. They had models that did not know how to laugh or cry. The delegates nodded, pleased with the order of their world. Some of them even smiled. On the horizon, the mood was quiet but not hopeless. Commander Alex Carter checked the status boards. He was careful with his words. He was careful with his hands. He liked clean plans and short sentences. He walked the line of consoles and asked about power, shields, guns, and drones. He said thank you when a crew member gave a clear answer. He said try again when the answer was not clear. He was not a loud man. People listened anyway. Lieutenant Megan Davis sat at the comm station. She wore a simple headset and a calm face. Her job was not only to send messages. Her job was to shape silence. She could hold back a word at the right time. She could bend a rumor into a lullaby. She knew the enemy was listening, and she knew how to make the enemy hear the wrong thing. She kept her notes neat. She kept a small photo of her sister in the corner of her screen. The photo reminded her that every message could be the one that kept someone alive. Laura read the latest update from Fleet Command. There were 3 human task groups in the system. The Horizon led the second group. The first group gathered near the inner planets. The third group guarded the supply ships. On the alien side, there was a layered force. Scouts in the dust lanes, carriers near the gas giant, heavy cruisers at the edge of the star's influence. The enemy plan was classic. They would push the scouts forward to trigger a human response, draw out the fast escorts, and then crush the escorts with a surprise strike from the heavies. If that failed, the carriers would release swarms and pin the human ships until the big guns arrived. Simple, brutal, elegant. The kind of plan people admire when they forget that real lives are inside those icons on a map. Laura closed the update and rubbed her eyes. She thought about the council. She thought about the way the galaxy liked to measure humans. She was not angry about it. She understood. Numbers are neat and people are messy. You can count ships. You cannot count a choice made in a breath. Still, she let a small smile touch her face. There were things the council did not know. There were tools they had not seen. There was a new rhythm in the human fleet, and she could feel it under her feet. The captain turned to Alex. He was already waiting. He asked for permission to start the readiness drill. She nodded. A quiet tone rolled through the ship. Crew members strapped into seats. Panels unfolded. Lights moved from green to yellow to steady green again. In engineering, a team checked the reactor flow. They took readings twice. They brought a secondary loop to idle. In the drone bay, techs opened cases and ran hands along frames and wings. They spoke to the machines as if they were animals before a run. In medical, a nurse laid out bandages with slow care. The Horizon did not shout. It prepared. Megan listened to the band scan. The enemy scouts were whispering to each other. They sent back weak position pings and small pieces of video. The video showed the first task group drifting near asteroid shadows. It looked exposed. It looked careless. It was not. The rocks were bait. Megan tagged the feed with a code that told Allied ships to watch but not respond. She then put a thin mist of false traffic into the enemy band. The mist looked like noise from freighters. It clung to the gaps in their attention. She breathed out, and the band sounded a little more crowded than it was. She liked it that way. The Alien Council started a live broadcast of the battle space to the chamber. The delegates leaned in. Some brought up private screens to view their favorite angles. One delegate ran a finger along a line of text that said, "Human collapse expected within hours." The line made him feel calm and important. Another delegate asked for tea. A third delegate opened a bet with a neighbor. The bet was small. It was just for fun. The chair cleared a throat and asked for quiet. The room fell to a faint hum. The galaxies waited for the numbers to come true. On the horizon, a young sensor officer named Mason spoke up. He had spotted something in the dust lanes. The blip moved like a scout but breathed like a mine. It gave off a heat echo that did not match the field around it. Mason said he could mark it for drones. Alex told him to mark it and hold. They would not shoot yet. They waited until the enemy scouts were in view of that same blip. When it went off, it would look like a human mistake. It would not be. Laura called for a short briefing. The crew did not need long speeches. They needed a clear picture. She told them the enemy expected a slow break. She told them the enemy thought humans would hold and bleed and then fade. She told them what the fleet would do instead. The second group would drift, quiet and cold. The first group would pretend to shift in panic. The third group would remain unseen behind a thin haze of jamming. At the right moment, the Horizon and two sister ships would light the field with a soft flare. The flare would make enemy targeting stumble. A breath later, new shapes would arrive. She did not name them. She did not have to. People felt the air on the bridge change. The moment after the briefing felt like the surface of a lake at dawn. Air moved in small circles. A light touch of fear tried to lift from the water. Laura let it be. Fear is a tool when it does not own you. She watched the clock. She watched the positions. A flight of enemy scouts cut toward the bait rocks. They were curious and proud. They sent a tiny pulse of triumph to their carriers. The pulse did not reach the carriers. Megan had already turned that path into a polite maze. The scouts did not know they were alone. The mine blip that Mason had marked woke up and trembled. It blew apart in a flash that barely left a shadow. To the scouts, it looked like a human tripwire. They veered left and dropped a line of tracers. The tracers lit the edges of the rocks. They did not see the small drones that sat in those shadows like quiet spiders. The drones did not fire. They waited. One scout sent a map to a friend. The friend sent a joke back. It was the last joke he sent. Alex checked with engineering. Power was steady. Weapons were aligned. He asked for a slow roll to present the narrow profile. He kept his voice easy. He hummed under his breath. The tune meant nothing. It kept the beat. The ship turned just enough to look frail from far away. It was a trick of angles. It was a way to speak to the enemy with shape and silence. He told the gunnery chief to breathe with the roll. The chief breathed and counted and smiled because it all clicked. Megan sent a single word to the sister ships. Ready. She did not send more. She did not need to. She clipped a small line and watched it curl away. It was an old habit from when she braided her sister's hair on a porch at dusk. She kept the motion small and hidden. It made her feel human in a room full of machines. The alien carriers moved into their favorite range. This was the zone where they could release swarms and still reel them back. Patterns of light flickered along their flanks. Doors opened. The carriers hummed. Then the field changed. A soft flare rose from the horizon and the two sister ships. It was not bright. It was not loud. It was tuned to a thin layer of the enemy's sight. It made distance look silly and speed look tired. Within that flare, human positions slid to where they needed to be. The timers whispered in sync. The drones in the rocks woke up and slipped out. They climbed the traces like thin paths in air. In the council chamber, the chart stuttered. A neat line that had fallen in a smooth curve grew a small bump. A delegate frowned and tapped his screen. He told himself it was a sensor glitch. He took a sip of tea. He looked at the time and thought about lunch. The chair asked a quiet question to an analyst. The analyst said there was no risk. He pointed to a numeric band and smiled with tired eyes. The scout sent a command to correct for drift. The command rode through the band, but it reached the wrong place. Megan had added 2 harmless echoes to the path. The command split, grew thin, and arrived late. In that small pause, the human drones were already above the scouts. The drones were not large. They carried smart metal that liked to kiss heat sinks and lock onto vibration. They did not make a dramatic sound. They made a small sound like a hand on a drum. The first scout lost thrust. The second scout lost sight. The third scout spun like a toy. Alex gave the line. Now. The gunnery chief did not shout. He touched 3 keys. The Horizon's guns fired a short burst. The burst did not chase, it led. It cut a clean seam through space where the enemy had to go. The sister ships stitched their own seams. The scouts flew into thin doors that had already closed. One by one they beat. The gap in the alien wall widened, and the horizon moved with calm steps through the breach. The escorts darted ahead, carving space with speed and courage. They spread small traps that looked like dust but bit like fire. The alien cruisers did not see them until their screens filled with sudden burns and lost signals. The human ships flowed like water, using the breach not as an escape but as a road. Laura Bennett watched the movement with steady eyes. She gave orders in short words, each one like a stone dropped in a river, ripples carrying far. Alex Carter stood beside her, guiding the escorts with hand signals and quiet commands. His voice never rose, but his words moved ships and lives. Megan Davis kept her ears in the airwaves, pulling in enemy cries and weaving new lies into their lines. She painted shapes of fear that the aliens believed were true. Together they turned silence into a weapon. The alien council chamber remained filled with confidence for a moment longer. Delegates clapped their hands when the cruisers fired another wide volley. They still believed the humans would fall. They looked at their neat lines of numbers and told each other that order always wins. Then one delegate leaned forward. He noticed that the human fleet was not breaking. It was bending, then snapping back. The projection did not match the screen. He whispered to his neighbor, but the neighbor shook his head. No one wanted to be the first to admit that the curve of the battle was not what they had been told. In space, the carriers prepared their swarm. Their bays opened, and light poured out like sparks from a forge. Thousands of drones rushed forward. They filled the sky with dots of light. The alien commanders laughed and felt secure again. They trusted in numbers. They trusted in tradition. They did not notice that their swarm was late. The scouts had been their eyes, and now their eyes were gone. The drones spread wide but struck shadows instead of ships. Megan smiled faintly at her console. She fed the swarm false echoes. Each echo was a warm dot that looked like a target. The swarm chased those dots and found only dust. Alex watched the gap widen as the escorts cut deeper. He told them to aim for the link ships, the quiet vessels that tied the swarm together. The escorts obeyed without hesitation. They fired small but sharp bursts that lanced through the weak hulls of the link ships. One by one, the swarm lost its rhythm. The sky became a confused storm. Laura's eyes stayed fixed on the carriers. She knew they were the true threat. The heavies looked strong, but without the carriers they would be slow and blind. She waited for the right moment. Timing mattered more than fire. She counted breaths and waited for Alex's signal. He raised his hand and gave a nod. The horizon rolled to present its broadside. Guns lit the dark with sudden fire. The sister ships joined, and the sky tore with light. The first carrier reeled under the strike. Its flank burned, and smoke poured into space. The second carrier tried to turn, but the gap in the wall made its path clumsy. It swung too far and showed its belly. Human guns dug into that soft place. The third carrier stayed back, unsure whether to push or flee. Its commander hesitated, and hesitation is a wound in battle. Laura pressed forward. In the council chamber, voices rose in alarm. The neat charts could not smooth the new lines. Delegates shouted at analysts. Some demanded that the broadcast be cut, but the chair refused. The galaxy was watching, and to cut the feed would look like fear. They tried to explain what they saw. They said the humans had used luck. They said the carriers would recover. But the screen showed fire, and fire is hard to explain away. Mason, the young sensor officer, called out a warning. A hidden enemy wing was emerging from the far side of the gas giant. These were fresh ships, sleek and fast. They were meant to strike the human flank while the swarm distracted them. But the swarm was broken and the flank was ready. Laura ordered the escorts to fall back into the gap. Alex guided them like a hand drawing a net. The enemy wing flew into that net without seeing it. The escorts closed around them and the horizon fired again. What was meant to be a surprise strike turned into a trap. Megan picked up the enemy's desperate calls. They begged their command ships for orders, but the orders came late and twisted. She made sure they came late. She pulled at the threads of their signals and knotted them into confusion. The alien wing fell apart. Some ships fled, others collided, and a few simply went dark. The council delegates who had bet on human defeat sat pale and silent. Laura did not cheer. She did not smile. She knew this was only the beginning. She told Alex to prepare the fleet for the next phase. They would not just survive. They would strike the heart. Alex nodded and began to plot the path. Megan cleared the bands for the signal that would bring the hidden dreadnoughts forward. The secret was about to wake. The dreadnoughts had been waiting in silence. They were cloaked in dark folds of space, hidden from every sensor. They were not just large ships. They were floating cities of war. When Megan sent the signal, they rose from the dark like giants. Their engines glowed with a low fire. Their guns unfolded like wings. The sight of them made even the human crews draw in their breath. For years, these ships had been rumors. Now they were real. The council chamber fell silent. Delegates stared in disbelief. Their models had dismissed the dreadnoughts as myths. Their analysts had called them too costly, too heavy, too human. Now they filled the screen with terrible grace. The chair of the council dropped the report in his hands. He could not speak. No one could. The dreadnoughts fired. Their shots were not bursts, but rivers of light. They cut through the alien carriers as if they were paper. The first carrier split in half, its decks peeling away. The second tried to run, but its engines were torn apart before it could flee. The third carrier turned to fight, but its guns were nothing against the storm. In minutes, the core of the alien fleet was gone. Laura stood steady on the bridge. She gave no long speech. She only said, "Hold the line." Her crew obeyed. Alex directed the escorts to clear the stragglers. Megan flooded the band with silence so the enemy could not even say goodbye. Mason watched the sensors and whispered the counts of fading ships. The horizon moved forward with calm steps, not as prey but as predator. The galaxy watched. On worlds far and wide, people saw that the humans had not fallen. They saw that the battle the council had promised would last for hours was ending in minutes. They saw the dreadnoughts and they whispered their names. Fear shifted from one side to the other. For the first time, alien rulers wondered if they had created a storm they could not stop. Laura breathed out and looked at the stars. She knew the war was far from over, but tonight the council's numbers had failed, and humanity's will had prevailed. She felt the weight of the moment, but she carried it with calm. She placed her hand on the rail again and listened to the pulse of the engines. The future was uncertain, but in this moment, humans had turned the tide, and the council had no choice but to watch. The smoke of burning carriers drifted across the starfield, faint in the dark. Human dreadnoughts held their line with steady lights glowing like small suns. The horizon moved among them, guiding smaller ships into place. Laura Bennett stood at the center of the bridge, calm but firm. She looked at the broken enemy formation and knew the battle was not done. Somewhere beyond the ruins, more ships would come. She whispered to herself that every calm moment in war was a mask for the storm that would follow. In the alien council chamber, the noise rose to chaos. Delegates shouted at each other, voices of anger and fear mixing in the air. Some blamed the analysts for false numbers. Others blamed the admirals for weak leadership. The chair tried to speak, but no one listened. On the screens, the dreadnoughts fired again, tearing apart the last of the carriers. The council could not deny what they saw. What was supposed to be a slow defeat for humans had become a swift disaster for their enemies. Alex Carter leaned over the map table on the horizon's bridge. He moved icons with steady fingers, placing the escorts along the flanks, arranging the dreadnoughts in a crescent. He thought not of glory, but of survival. He knew the enemy would send reinforcements. They could not accept such a loss without reply. His mind drew paths of attack and defense, each one simple and clear. He spoke only when needed, his words carrying weight because he never wasted them. Megan Davis listened to the bands. She heard broken signals of enemy survivors calling for help. Some begged for orders that would not come. Others cried out to families light years away. She felt a sting in her chest but did not let it break her. Her task was not to feel pity but to control the air. She sent calm updates to allied ships, her voice steady as stone. She also slipped small lies into the enemy channels. Lies that made them believe human numbers were even greater than they were. Confusion spread like a fog. Mason at sensors called out a reading. A new formation was coming out from the shadow of the gas giant. This one was larger than before. A wave of cruisers and destroyers backed by heavy command ships. They were not as proud as the first wave. They came in tighter, learning from mistakes. Laura listened to Mason's report and gave a single nod. She had expected this. Battles were not won by one strike. They were won by holding after the strike. She ordered the fleet to tighten the crescent. The dreadnoughts shifted, their massive hulls turning with quiet power. The escorts filled the gaps like quick fish around whales. The Horizon and her sister ships took the center, their guns aimed forward. It was a wall of steel and fire ready to meet the storm. The alien wave advanced. Their guns flared, sending streams of plasma that lit the dark. The human shields held, but each impact shook the decks. Crew members gritted their teeth and kept to their tasks. Engineering teams ran through heat and smoke, cooling the reactors and patching lines. Medics in the lower decks treated burns and cuts from the shock of impacts. No one stopped. Everyone knew the wall must hold. Laura's voice carried across the bridge. She did not shout. She spoke in steady words, reminding her crew of their duty. She told them the enemy believed humans would fall in hours, but they had already survived beyond that. She told them that every minute they held was another wound in the Council's pride. Her words settled into the hearts of her crew like anchors. Alex gave the order for counterfire. The Horizon and her sisters fired in a rhythm, bursts of light crossing the void. Dreadnoughts followed with deeper strikes, their guns pounding into the enemy wave. Escorts darted ahead, throwing sharp bursts and then retreating before the enemy could lock on. The void turned into a sea of fire and motion. Megan broke into the enemy's command band. She heard their leader giving careful orders, trying to control the chaos. She smiled faintly and cut pieces of the orders into fragments, sending half to one wing and half to another. The enemy ships began to drift apart, each one acting on a different half-truth. Their tight formation loosened. Alex saw the gap forming and gave the signal. Human guns struck through the opening, splitting the wave. Mason shouted again. A signal from deeper space showed more reinforcements moving in. These were heavier ships and they would arrive soon. Laura looked at the map and made her choice. She ordered the dreadnoughts to push forward, while the smaller ships held the line. It was a risk, but she knew the dreadnoughts had the strength to break the enemy spirit before the next wave came. The giants advanced. Their engines glowed, their guns roared. They moved like mountains carried on rivers. The enemy tried to stop them, but their fire bounced off thick armor. The dreadnoughts answered with storms of light. Enemy ships cracked and burned. Explosions lit the void. The council chamber watched in silence as their proud armada fell apart. On the horizon, alarms rang as enemy fire grazed the hull. Sparks flew across a console. A young officer fell injured by shrapnel. Medics rushed to her side. Laura glanced but did not waver. She trusted her people to care for each other while she carried the weight of command. She told Alex to keep pressing. She told Megan to hold the band open. She told Mason to watch for the next wave. Alex's escorts cut deeper into the enemy lines. They struck at supply ships hiding behind the heavies. Without supplies, the enemy guns grew weaker. Without fuel, their engines slowed. One by one, alien ships turned to flee. But the dreadnoughts did not allow them peace. They chased with slow, crushing steps, breaking each target in their path. Megan intercepted a desperate message from the enemy leader. He begged the council for help. He said the humans fought like demons, that their dreadnoughts were not machines but monsters. His voice cracked as he spoke. The council delegates in the chamber shifted uncomfortably. They had promised the galaxy a quick victory, and now their own commander was crying for rescue. Laura pressed her hand on the rail and gave the final command for this phase. She ordered the dreadnoughts to unleash their full barrage. The giants obeyed. Their guns lit the void brighter than stars. The enemy wave shattered. Cruisers broke in two. Destroyers spun into fire. Command ships split apart. The few survivors fled into the dark, their engines leaving trails like scars. The Horizon's bridge was filled with silence after the guns went quiet. Crew members breathed heavily, sweat on their brows, but their eyes were steady. Laura looked at them and felt pride. She told them the battle was not over, but they had already done what the council thought impossible. They had turned hours of predicted defeat into minutes of victory. In the council chamber, silence reigned. Delegates stared at the screens. Their charts lay forgotten, their bets abandoned. The chair finally spoke, his voice thin. He said the war was not lost. He said reinforcements would turn the tide. But his words carried no weight. The galaxy had seen what humans could do. The galaxy had seen their will. Laura turned her eyes back to the stars. She knew the next wave was coming. She knew the war would grow fiercer. But she also knew that the council's fear had begun. And once fear takes root, it grows faster than fire. She whispered to herself, "We are not done," and stood ready for what came next. The stars glowed faint and distant as silence fell for a brief moment across the field. Wreckage drifted in quiet arcs, lit by flashes from broken reactors. Human dreadnoughts stood tall, their guns cooling after the storm. The horizon floated steady, its hull marked by burns and scars but still unbroken. On the bridge, Laura Bennett stood with calm eyes, her hand resting on the rail. She knew this stillness was only a pause. The enemy would not allow their shame to linger without reply. Alex Carter studied the map at his station. His fingers traced the shapes of ships, both human and alien. He could see the lines of the next fight forming even before Mason at Sensors confirmed it. A massive force was coming, bigger than the waves before. It was a fleet gathered in desperation, drawn from nearby sectors. They would arrive in minutes, not hours. Alex did not smile, but his eyes sharpened. He whispered to himself that the real test had begun. Megan Davis leaned close to her console, her ear tuned to the bands. She heard the growing hum of enemy signals. They were speaking fast and sharp, trying to rebuild order after chaos. She sent steady words to Allied ships, words like ropes tying them together. She also slipped lies into the enemy band, small ones that made them think the dreadnoughts were fewer than they were, that fuel was low, that human morale was weak. Lies layered on lies until truth seemed distant. Mason reported the count. Dozens of cruisers, scores of destroyers, and a new class of heavy ships with long guns that stretched like spears. They were not carriers, but something else, built to strike from far away. The Council must have kept them hidden until now, waiting for a day when humans were to be crushed. Laura nodded and gave her order. Hold the wall. Do not break. Engines roared across the fleet. Escorts slid into place, forming lines like threads across a loom. Dreadnoughts shifted again, their shadows vast against the stars. The horizon held center, her sister ships close on either side. The humans braced as the alien wave appeared from the dark. The enemy opened fire first. Long beams of energy lashed across the void. They cut through wreckage and slammed into shields. The horizon shook, panels rattling and sparks leaping from a console. Crew members braced themselves, eyes locked on their work. No one panicked. They had lived through storms before, and they would again. Laura gave the word to return fire. The humans answered with rhythm. The dreadnoughts fired in sequence one after the other, so the enemy felt no pause between strikes. The escorts darted ahead, scattering mines that looked like dust. Each mine carried a sharp sting that waited for the right heat to pass. Within moments, alien destroyers began to spark as hidden mines clung to their hulls. Confusion spread, but the wave pressed on. Megan broke into their command band once more. She found the voice of a new enemy commander, sharp and cold. He spoke with no fear, giving clear orders, adjusting for losses. Megan frowned. This one would not break easily. She tested his signals with false echoes, but he cut through them with discipline. For the first time, she felt resistance in the silence she shaped. She leaned forward and worked harder, weaving lies with greater care. Alex kept his eyes on the flank. He saw the enemy pushing to encircle. He sent escorts to block, moving them like fast hands against slower ones. The battle became a dance of motion. The horizon rolled and fired again. Dreadnoughts shook as beams struck their armor, but they did not fall. Instead, they pressed closer, their guns speaking in thunder. Mason's voice cut through the noise. A signal showed enemy ships trying to swing behind the fleet. If they succeeded, the humans would be caught between hammers. Laura listened, then gave her decision. She ordered 2 dreadnoughts to break off and meet the flank head-on. It was dangerous to divide, but it was the only way. The giants obeyed, turning slowly but with power. They met the flank in a storm of fire, their guns ripping through destroyers like paper. The flank folded before it could strike. On the horizon's bridge, heat filled the air as shields struggled. Engineers in the lower decks worked with sweat dripping, pulling cables, patching leaks, cooling reactors with improvised lines. Sparks burned their hands, but they kept going. Medics carried the wounded past, laying them on stretchers, whispering comfort while alarms wailed. War was not clean. It was metal, fire, and pain, carried by hands that refused to stop. The alien council chamber watched the broadcast with pale faces. Delegates whispered fearfully. They had promised their worlds that humans would be broken in hours. Now the hours had turned to minutes, and still the humans fought. The new heavy ships that were meant to be the pride of the fleet were faltering under the relentless dreadnoughts. The chair of the council gripped the edge of his seat. He had no words left. Megan heard a crack in the enemy band. The cold commander's voice wavered for just a moment as one of his heavies exploded in a bloom of light. She seized the chance. She sent echoes into the band, twisting his commands into panic. His fleet hesitated, some ships breaking formation. Alex saw the opening. He ordered the escorts to strike deep. They cut like knives through the gap, hitting fuel ships and leaving trails of fire. Laura stood tall and gave the final order. All guns forward. The Horizon and her sisters roared. Dreadnoughts followed, escorts stabbed and fled. The enemy wave broke apart, ships scattering in all directions. Some tried to fight, others tried to run, but none could hold. The humans pressed until the void was filled with fire and silence. When the last alien ship fled, the Horizon's bridge grew quiet. Crew members sat back, their faces pale but their eyes alive. Laura looked at them with pride. She told them the battle was not over, but they had stood against the storm and held. They had shown the galaxy that humans could not be broken by numbers, by predictions, or by fear. In the council chamber, silence reigned once more. Delegates looked at the screens and saw their fleet in ruins. They saw humans standing tall. Their charts meant nothing. Their pride was ash. Fear filled their hearts, for they knew the galaxy had changed. Humanity was no longer a small voice. It was a storm, and it had spoken. Laura placed her hand again on the rail, feeling the hum of the engines. She breathed slow and steady. She knew more battles would come, but she also knew they had already changed the story. What was supposed to be defeat in hours had become victory in minutes. And the galaxy had no choice but to listen. The wreckage of the enemy fleet drifted like broken glass across the stars. Fires burned faintly in the dark, sparks glowing and fading as if the void itself breathed. The dreadnoughts slowed their advance, standing tall in the silence. The Horizon moved carefully among them, guiding the smaller ships into safer lines. On the bridge, Laura Bennett stood with her hand on the rail, her face calm but her heart heavy. They had won another round, but she knew the enemy was not finished. War never ended in a single night. Alex Carter studied the shifting map at his console. Icons of enemy survivors scattered into the edges of the system, some fleeing, some hiding. Behind them, more signals stirred, reinforcements still on their way. Alex tapped the map slowly, thinking of how to hold, how to strike, and how to survive what was coming. His voice was steady as he gave orders to the escorts, sending them to clear wreckage, to gather allies, to form lines that would hold no matter what came. Megan Davis sat at the comms, her headset pressed close. She listened to the faint cries of enemy survivors and the quiet cheers of human crews. She shaped the silence between them, sending calm orders to the fleet, weaving words that kept courage alive. She also kept her ear on the enemy band, where fear and anger grew. Some alien captains begged for retreat. Others swore revenge. Megan smiled faintly and whispered to herself that anger was a poor shield. Mason at sensors reported faint signals. The enemy reinforcements were closing in, slower than expected but stronger. They carried more heavies, more long-range guns, and command ships meant to rebuild order. Laura listened and nodded. She knew they would not stop. She gave the order to prepare again. No rest, no pause. The fleet braced. In the council chamber, silence had turned to despair. Delegates sat pale, watching the ruins of their proud fleets. They whispered to one another in disbelief. The chair raised a hand and tried to speak of honor, of resilience, but the words rang hollow. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy saw the truth. The council had promised a human defeat within hours, but hours had already passed and humans still stood. The enemy reinforcements entered the system. Their formation was tight, their lines strong. They did not rush. They advanced with care, learning from the mistakes of those before them. Laura watched them approach, her eyes sharp. She ordered the dreadnoughts to spread wide, forming a new crescent. The escorts filled the gaps, quick and ready. The Horizon stood firm in the center. Megan whispered calm into the bands. Alex drew paths of defense and counterstrike. Mason counted every step of the enemy advance. The stage was set, the alien guns fired first. Long beams crossed the void, striking shields and shaking hulls. The Horizon trembled under the impact, but the crew held steady. Sparks flew from a console, smoke rising from the lower decks, but engineers ran with tools in hand, patching, cooling, and repairing. Medics carried the injured to safety, their hands steady despite the chaos. No one wavered. The wall-held Laura gave the order to return fire. The dreadnoughts roared, their guns thundering in rhythm. The Horizon and her sisters fired in unison, bursts of light cutting through the dark. The escorts darted ahead, laying traps and striking quick before pulling back. The void turned into fire and shadow, each side pressing, each side refusing to yield. Megan listened to the enemy band. She found the voice of a new commander, colder than the last, sharper than a blade. He gave orders without pause, his fleet moving like a single machine. Megan frowned but worked harder, slipping small lies into his signals, bending truth just enough to slow his rhythm. She whispered into the human band, steady and calm, reminding them that they were not alone, that every ship was part of something larger. Alex guided the fleet with precision. He saw the enemy trying to flank again, and he sent escorts to meet them. He drew the dreadnoughts into a deeper crescent, turning the enemy's push into a trap. Each order he gave was simple, each move clear. The crew followed without hesitation. The wall bent but did not break. Instead, it snapped back, striking hard. Mason's voice cut through the noise. A massive enemy command ship was moving into position. Its guns were longer, its armor thicker. It was the pride of the enemy fleet. Laura listened and made her choice. She ordered all dreadnoughts to focus fire. Megan cleared the bands. Alex gave the signal. The giants turned and roared. Their guns tore into the command ship, light flooding the dark. The ship shuddered, cracked, and finally broke apart in a storm of fire. The enemy froze in shock. In the council chamber, delegates gasped. Their last hope had been shattered in minutes. Some stood shouting in anger. Others sat in silence, their faces pale. The chair lowered his head. He knew the truth could not be hidden. The humans had done what no one believed possible. The enemy fleet faltered. Some tried to fight, others tried to flee. Laura gave the final order. Press forward. Do not let them recover. The horizon surged ahead, dreadnoughts following like mountains in motion. Escorts darted around them, cutting down stragglers. Guns roared and the void filled with fire. The enemy broke apart, their pride burned to ash. When the last ship fled, silence fell. The horizon's bridge glowed with the dim light of cooling consoles. Crew members sat back, exhausted but alive. Laura looked at them with pride. She told them they had done what the council thought impossible. They had ended the battle in minutes, not hours. They had shown the galaxy that humans were not weak, not reckless, not fragile. They were strong, they were clever, and they would not be broken. Megan leaned back in her chair, her eyes closed for a moment. She thought of her sister, safe on Earth, and whispered a promise that she would come home. Alex stood tall, his eyes on the map, already thinking of the next battle. Mason looked at his screens, counting the fading signals, whispering each one like a prayer. In the council chamber, silence remained. The galaxy had watched, and the galaxy knew. Humanity had been underestimated for the last time. The council had promised defeat, but the humans had ended the battle in minutes. The tide had turned, and nothing would ever be the same. Laura placed her hand once more on the rail. She breathed deep and steady. She looked at the stars and whispered to herself that the war was not over, but victory was no longer a dream. It was real. Humanity had risen, and the galaxy would remember.